So we left this off with our basic motion. Let's just play this out. So we had our motion and we have our jump, but we were saying the issue is that when I go the other way, it actually looks like our character's moonwalking. So let's have a look at changing this. Back to the BP8, and we're back on our actual run. So our input or our event for our running. So in this, I'm going to do a get controller. And from the get controller, we're going to go in and we're going to set control rotation. Okay. So let's just get this and let's plug this into here. Like that. From our new rotation here, I'm going to drag out. And I'm going to use a select. So this kind of works like a branch. Let's drag this out. Let's just give this a bit of room. So essentially here we have our condition, and then we have our two options depending on our condition. So I'm going to take out of my action value. So remember, this is telling us whether we're moving forward or backwards on this. I'm going to take this value out, and I'm going to check if this is greater than 0. So basically, if it's greater than 0, it's moving right. If it's less than 0, it's moving left. So we need to change our direction based on that. So we can pull that out as a condition and plug that in there, and notice that this now becomes essentially a Boolean. So let's just press Q on that. So for our true, we're going to do a make rotator. And it's this one down at the bottom. And in terms of our rotation, actually for this, so basically if this is more than 0, it is moving right. So we don't need to change anything here. These are all fine. For our false, let's just copy and paste this. Let's drag this in. So for this, we need to flip it on the Z-axis, and we need to flip it completely around 180 degrees. Okay. So let's just bring this out. Just to neaten those up. Okay. You don't have to do this, by the way. Just can offend me. Let's just get that like that. That's fine. Okay. So let's try this out. Let's just compile and save. Go into here. And there we have our player going the right way. And now we have our player going the other way. Okay. Now, what you might find, I'm just going to reset something. So by default, this camera is going to be slightly different. So let's compile and save this, and you may get this. So when you go one way, that's fine. When you go the other way, so I'm now pressing A. It's running right, but obviously it's not changing direction, but it's still going the right way. It's not going backwards anymore, but it's constantly running forwards. Now, I don't know if you can notice this, that the sky behind seems to go a bit weird. So I'm just going to do Shift F1. And what that's going to do is it's just going to bring the mouse controller back. And I'm just going to detach this from the player controller. Let's just see if we can get this working. It's difficult to see, really. But our camera is actually flipping around. It's tricky to see with this. So let's come out of this. And let's fix this anyway. So essentially, our camera is turning as our player turns. rather than staying in a fixed position. So to fix this, we just go to spring arm. And on our rotation over here, we set this to be world, and it's an absolute rotation. So basically that does not change as the player rotates round. So let's compile and save that. And then that one, as we saw before, now works perfectly. Okay. So we've got our jump. So let's just fix this up a little bit, make it look a little better. The nice thing about using these components, so these class types, so this in this case the paper character sprite, we've got this character movement, and this does a lot of the work for us, and it also means that we can go in and change a lot of properties as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in. So the jump looks a bit light at the minute. So the first thing I'm going to do is increase the gravity scale. So let's say we increase it to about 3. Obviously, the higher it is, the more gravity is pulling us down. So you can see we're dropping a lot more quickly. The trouble with this is we're not jumping up as much. So let's just go back in. And let's just search for our jump velocity. Let's increase this. So let's try kind of double this. Let's try 800. Save that. Okay. Another thing we can do with this as well is if I just go back to my jump. So actually it's doing a little bit. So let me just turn this back to 0. So remember what this is doing is checking when we're falling. So as soon as it starts falling, it switches over to the falling animation. We can just pause that a little bit. So just by changing this from minus to another value. If we have this, let's just try quite a high value on that. This is probably going to be ridiculous, but let's just see. So you see, by setting that value, it's not really, before it's hit the ground, it's not even had a chance to change over to our falling animation. But we can offset that a little bit. So let's try minus 100. And it's just going to keep that jumping animation until just after it started falling now. So that's just down to taste, but you can play around with that. Just so it's, as soon as it starts falling, it's not changing over to the falling animation. But you can see with that jump now, that's much better. Okay. The other thing we can do is we can control the player when they're in the air as well. So we have a little bit of control here, but it's mainly on the spot. So again, let's go in on our character motion. Let's do air control. And if we increase this value, let's say minus 6, compile. So the higher this is, the more control while we've got on the air. Let's just set this a bit higher. Let's try 0.8. Let's try 1. Compile, save. So it's a bit more interactive as it jumps now. Control it a little bit more. So a couple of other things that we might want to set up, just things to watch out for. If we have a, just check if this is switched off. So if we have some kind of dynamic object, this is going to cause two problems. So right now we just want our player constrained to the essentially the x-axis, and then we have got a bit of control over the y-axis if we needed to, but I don't want it to shift. Sorry, on the z-axis. I don't want it to shift on this y-axis. And sometimes when you're getting dynamic objects in the way, let me just move this a bit in, it could cause the player to move out of its path. So let's see if it does this. It's actually not bad. Now this is a different thing, but we don't want the player to actually move from its original position. But we're also getting this thing where suddenly the player comes right up to the front like this as well. So let's just go in and fix these things. So if I just go in back into our BP Night, I'm going to click on this character movement first of all, and I've just typed in constrain. So here we can constrain to a plane, and then I can tell it which axes I don't want this to move on. So in our case, it's going to be the y-axis. Otherwise, it might accidentally move on that. The other thing I want is for the camera not to be affected by collisions, where we get that where it's hitting something that's moving out because it's colliding with it. So if I go into the spring arm, let's do this collision. I'm going to get rid of this do collision test. So I'll click off this. Let's compile. Let's save. Let's do this again. So now it won't move anywhere. And also we haven't got the issue with the camera. Okay. So some other little things while we're just fixing issues. If I go right to the end of this, we have this little thing where it doesn't fall straight off a ledge. It has this section where it almost, like there, where it kind of hangs in the air and then falls. And that's down to the capsule. So if I click on our capsule, if we type in, is it ground? No. Is it on? Let's just try. Let's try this because I think it is floor. There we go. So on our character movement, if we just type in floor, we have this use flat base for floor. So instead of using the round capsule, this is almost doing it as a flat edge. So with this one, again, if I just compile and save, press play. Now if I go to the edge, so it's going to fall much better. Okay. And just a final couple of things just in terms of the settings. I'm just going to go back to my project settings. Just going to go into anti-aliasing. So anti-aliasing, I'm setting this temporal super resolution. I'm going to switch this to this fast approximate anti-aliasing. It's going to be better for our 2D, or you can click this off as well. Let's type in exposure. So the exposure, I don't want this auto exposure on. I'm going to take the exposure bias off as well. Okay. So in our case, it doesn't look too different, but it can cause problems as well. And I think that's it for this particular tutorial. So we've now got our character jumping, looking much better when it's jumping. It's moving both directions. It's got all the animation states for the running left and right, the idle pose, and our jump states as well. Okay, we've got our character moving.